Let's go ahead and get started because we're at two after. As people join, I'll let them in. But thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's good to see some familiar names on there. I hate that we don't get to see each other in person as much, but this is better than nothing, right? Seeing your names and faces on here. So again, welcome everyone. I want to introduce to you today Jen McFarland from the Hartford Funds. Those of you on the line who have 401k plans with us, you may have a Hartford Fund in your lineup, likely. Jen and I have worked together for 15 years, maybe
Yeah.
longer. I don't even know. I was saying earlier, we both started working when we were 10 years old, so we're not
That's
that. But it's been a long, successful partnership. So Jen, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Jen is joining us today to present a seminar called 8,000 Days. And most of the presentations we do for you all regarding retirement are numbers based, right? We're just trying to talk to you about how to financially prepare for retirement and have a great, secure retirement, which is obviously extremely important. But this seminar is going to look at retirement in a little bit of a different light. So then rather than seeing it as, hey, I got to save my money and this is like the end of my career, this is looking at an active phase of your life that could last up to 8,000 days, right? Which is 22 years or more. So Jen's going to break it down into four phases. And we'll discuss how to prepare for long, fulfilling retirement, but by looking at financial, health, social aspects, and just to help all of us plan for this extended period that's really probably close to a fourth of your lifetime, hopefully, when we get there. So, Jen, without further ado, please take it away.
Yes, thank you so much, Abby, and thank you all for joining. I love this presentation because it is, let me share it here with you, because it is one that I don't think we talk enough about, right? We always have this idea of retirement planning being financial. And for a lot of us, it is, right? We have, the thought of, are we going to run out of money? How much is our healthcare going to cost? All of those things. But at the end of the day, what we're really thinking about with this presentation is the quality of your life as you age. We've got this conundrum, and it's not a bad conundrum, but it is a conundrum. We have finally made life expectancy longer, which is awesome, except we don't know how to fill it. And we tend to spend a lot of our time planning on the financial side and not so much on the quality side. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and just get into what 8,000 days actually means. And as Abby mentioned, those four phases, what those look like, and some of the opportunities and the fun things that you can look forward to as you start to age. So let me start off by saying all of this information is coming from the MIT Age Lab. And it is just what it sounds like. It is literally a lab at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts that studies aging. And it's made up of a bunch of engineers and researchers, and they are looking at some of the challenges and opportunities that come with longevity. They've been doing this research since 1999, when actually the Hartford, who is our parent company, went to the founder of the MIT Age Lab, Dr. Joe Coughlin, and said, listen, we have a bunch of drivers that are getting into more accidents and their premiums keep going up. How can we help them continue to stay independent, help them to stay driving, but make their insurance more palatable from a cost perspective? And these guys kind of took it and ran with it. And what came of that first meeting, that genesis of the MIT Age Lab, is something we kind of take for granted now in our cars, but it was the backup camera. So a lot of innovation coming from here, a lot of data, and we just love these guys. They do a lot of work for Hartford Funds to tell us about some of the trends that you all are thinking about and really break it down into some digestible chunks so that we can all get excited about planning for what could be, as Abby mentioned, a fourth of our life, right? So there's Dr. Joe. If you're ever in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and you do see a guy with a bow tie and red sneakers, it's probably Dr. Joe. But like he said, we have a longevity paradox. We've achieved this longer life, but we don't have a good idea of what to do with all that additional time. And it can impact how much time we actually have in that last phase of life if we don't plan correctly. So we're going to talk about 8,000 days. We're going to dive into those 4 phases, and then talk a little bit about how you can plan for this as you go about just all your other planning for retirement. So the first thing that I would mention is 8,000 days is actually the same amount of time that we have in all of the other phases of our life. So, for instance, from birth until about your first job or graduation from college or going off into grad school is about 22 years. It's about 8,000 days. That's our learning phase. Then we have growing, where we get our family set up, we buy a house, or we decide where we're going to live. The maturing phase is kind of after your midlife crisis and getting to retirement. You're watching your kids grow up. Maybe you're getting into some more volunteering. You're just discovering yourself again. And finally, this last phase that we call exploring. This is the last phase of life that is now 8,000 days as well. And this is the part that we get to create for ourselves. And the reason I say that is because we don't have a ton of role models when it comes to living for 22 years, which is about 8,000 days in retirement. We do have a few, and we like to highlight them. It is not a coincidence that they're all women. As we know, women do live a little bit longer than men on average, but just to tell the stories, I will say right now the oldest living person is Maria Moreira there. She's actually 116 now, since she's still alive. But some interesting other stories here. Catherine Switzer was the first woman to run in the Boston Marathon. If you've ever seen that picture of those, the mob kind of trying to pull her number off, that was her. And she actually just ran it recently at the age of 75. Julia Hurricane Hawkins, 107. She has a world record for a 100-yard sprint. Jeannie Calment was an interesting one. She was a French lady who is actually known to be the oldest person that ever lived. And she always talked about how she started riding her bike when she was 100. She would eat like a pound of chocolate a month. I mean, this woman, she was not eating paleo or keto or anything like that. She enjoyed life. And she stopped smoking at the age of 99. So, she was doing something right, maybe not health-wise, but she still was able to live as long as anybody else. So just some examples of how people are out there already kind of recreating their older years, their later years, and you have that opportunity too. And it is a high possibility that you will live a lot longer than probably your parents. The likelihood that one or both of the partners will survive to age 92 is now at 50% if you're 65 today. So I hear all the time from clients, well, both my parents died at 78, or, no one made it past 80, what have you. And we just say that is changing. Not only is healthcare better, but we're also living a little bit differently, and we're living longer. So with that in mind, the traditional retirement story just doesn't work. It used to be, okay, I retire from my job and I have maybe 5 or 6 good years, and then that's it. And so I'm going to cram in those 5 or 6 good years, travel, seeing the grandkids, hobbies, whatever. But now we know that is a lot more complex, because instead of 5 or 6 years, we're planning for potentially 22 years, 2 decades. And it encompasses a lot of other parts. And so we almost have to retire that old age story and kind of put that away as something that we're not really planning for those 5 or 6 years. Travel, grandkids, hobbies, certainly a part of the retirement story, but it is definitely just a small part of it. There's so many other things that we need to be thinking about. So how do we think about this? A decade or 2 decades is a long time. And, we have a roadmap for all those other phases of our lives, right? We know exactly that we're going to go through kindergarten through 12th grade, and then we can get a job or go to trade school, go to college. There's a plan. We know, okay, we're supposed to get, our job started, maybe purchase property, maybe have a family. That's even changing, but there's somewhat of a roadmap. When it comes to this last phase of our life, it is pretty uninvented. So MIT has taken the data that they get from surveying tens of thousands of people every year to essentially understand where within that 22 years you need to start thinking about what. And they came up with these 4 phases of retirement to help us. So the first phase is called the honeymoon phase. The second phase is the big decision phase. Third is navigating longevity. And then the fourth is the solo journey phase. So let's dive in. And these are fluid. It does not mean that every single one of these phases is 5 years long or 6 years long. You may move through these really quickly. You may move through these really slowly. You may jump to a different phase. But these are just kind of roadmaps, guideposts that can help you as you start thinking about this. So the first phase is this honeymoon phase. And what we're talking about here is how ambiguous how unclear this phase of your life is. We're essentially really talking about how the role of work changes. It doesn't necessarily always go away, but it changes. Obviously, income is going to change, and family dynamics play a big role in this first part of retirement, the honeymoon phase. And this is where MIT even gets a little bit squirrely about talking about retirement or using that word, because what they're noting is that so many more people are choosing not to leave work, but rather change the work they're doing or change the number of hours that they're working. So in other words, they're saying, listen, I don't want to just cut myself off from all employment. I want to stay engaged in some way or another. And remote work since COVID has made this really, really easy. 61% of 35 and younger people said, gosh, this remote work makes my life really hard. Only a third of older workers thought the same. And that flexibility is keeping a lot more people working at their current jobs than they maybe otherwise would have. And a lot more people are doing that. And they're not doing it for money. So the last stat that I read was about 65% of people over 65 were going to work until at least 70. So we're seeing a shift of folks that are continuing to work. And the number one reason is that they want to stay active and involved. Number two is they enjoy it. Not until number three, at 68%, do they want some money. And it's really just to buy extras. So there are some financial concerns there, obviously. But at the end of the day, a lot of people are choosing to continue to work because they want to. Now, that doesn't mean that you work in your same job. A lot of folks are actually doing gig work. And by gig work, I mean they're finding jobs where they create the schedule. So think about Uber and Lyft and some of those other types of services. Those are called gig jobs. And believe it or not, the largest percentage of folks working in those jobs are those people over age 60. And it's interesting, if you take an Uber, if you take a Lyft, you do see it. When you start to notice it, you'll see it. But older workers love these jobs because it keeps them engaged, it gives them something to do, but they can create their own schedule. And if they don't want to work all night, every night, they don't have to. And they can really fashion it to however their life is working. A lot of folks also at this point will start thinking about, how can I use the skills that I learned on my job forever and ever and ever, and share those skills or be a mentor to someone who is just starting. So we see a lot of people start teaching. We see consultants, we see people going in and acting as mentors, maybe doing some training. So there's a lot of things to think about. But the point is that a lot of people are continuing to work. The other thing that we think about in the honeymoon phase is just financially. A lot of people who are just entering retirement are still helping their millennial children financially. And it really used to be very different. It used to be that their adult children would help the parents. And today it's the other way around. And what's happening is simply just a kind of a failure to launch, if you will, on the millennial side. But also, timing has been really tough for those guys. They've been holding off buying homes, holding off having families. And so parents are helping adult children a lot more than they maybe originally had thought they would. The other thing just to keep in mind is that, we don't have pensions, right? So there is a little bit of a financial reality with people continuing to work after the age of 66 or 65, whatever they consider retirement. Only 40% or about 40% of workers say they have a pension. The actual number is about 33%. And 60% of people expect to receive benefits from a defined benefit plan or a pension plan that they don't have. So that's a little scary too, and sometimes can be surprising when they hit the honeymoon phase. So, a lot of things about income, a lot of decisions to be made about how the role of work is going to play out over the next couple of years, what my income stream looks like. The honeymoon phase can be very high anxiety, but it can also be the time when a lot of people are taking those trips, doing the things that they wanted to do in retirement, and sort of enjoying for the first time some freedom. There is a paradox, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on, but there is a paradox with that freedom in that you really need to want to understand what you're retiring to, not just what you're retiring from. And you see it if people don't have anything that they're retiring to, there's a pretty steep decline physically and emotionally if they retire to nothing versus someone that retires to something that they've thought about, that they've planned for. There's a big difference there. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but definitely want to start thinking about that before retirement so that you know what you're going to retire to versus just what you're retiring from. So the big decision phase kind of comes after you've settled into maybe a different rhythm of your life. You're in retirement for a few years, you feel comfortable about your income. And now you have to start thinking longer term. AKA, where are you going to live? What am I going to fill my time with? And how do I maintain access to the things that I enjoy? And so this big decision phase is named appropriately, right? There's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And the first is where you're going to live, right? A lot of folks will start thinking about retirement communities, assisted living. You've got to think about if you're going to stay by family or do you want to move to that warmer climate? And so it is interesting to kind of think about those things and start planning the options. There's a lot more these days than there ever have been before. Oh, this is flying. Obviously, a lot of people are wanting to stay in their home after COVID because of the nightmares that they heard about, about nursing homes and things like that. But is that feasible, right? This is the things you have to think about before you get to this phase. So it may be something that, you definitely want to stay at home. You have a one room or one floor house. You're all set up, but you didn't think about, having a shower that you could step into, or you didn't think about countertops maybe being lower if you happen to have to need a wheelchair or something like that. There are people that can help you with that called Certified Aging in Place Specialists. They're called CAPS. And if you're planning to do any home renovation around retirement or getting close to retirement, definitely look into maybe hiring a CAPS specialist so that they can show you ways of making your house age friendly. Since I think the last stat I read was about 82% of people over the age of 65 want to stay in their home. So just something to think about. But obviously there's a lot of options. One of the more interesting articles that MIT Age Lab has recently put out is that they're seeing a flux of retirees moving to college towns. So, think like Oxford, Ohio, where Miami is, or, some of the smaller towns. And they're finding that because there's public transportation, there's art, there's culture, there's classes folks can take, there's sports. There's a lot of activities that will keep a senior busy. And it's usually fairly inexpensive relative to a bigger city. But there's also places like Beacon Hill in Boston where there's a block there that, because it is so expensive to leave, there are a lot of older people that live in one block and no one is buying their home. Young people are not moving in. And so what they've done is create sort of a community, a neighborhood watch, if you will, which acts almost like a 50 plus community for the people that live on that block. They just created it themselves. So people are getting pretty creative. It's really fun to see. If you don't take anything from this presentation except for these three questions, I will be happy. These are the three questions, and I can't say this a lot in my job, but MIT Age Lab guarantees that if you can answer these three questions today, and in 10 years, and in 20 years, and when you're 90 and 95, the quality of your life will be higher. And it's funny because you don't think about that, but who will change my light bulbs? You probably have an answer for today. Do you have an answer for when you're 90? How will I get an ice cream cone? Or I've had some people say, you should change that to how will I get a beer? How will you maintain access to the things you like in your life? And then last but not least is who will I have lunch with? What does your social network look like? These three questions, as simple as they are on the outset, are very, very important to be able to think about and have answers for as you move through your life. And they're going to change. The answers are going to change. I did a seminar and I asked who will change my light bulb, and a lady in the back said, oh, it's definitely my grandson. He's great. He always comes over to my house. And then at the end of the seminar, she was talking to me about the same grandson that was moving to California to go to college. And I said, well, is he still going to be able to change your light bulb? And she just went, you know what? You're right. I have to think about that. But we don't think in these terms, right? We're thinking dollars, cents, mutual funds, stocks, cash, light bulbs, ice cream cones, and forks. These are really important things to think about as it pertains to the quality of your life. The third phase is when our healthcare or the healthcare of someone close to us is starting to sort of take over as the main focus in our life. And this does get very heady because obviously as we get older, there's more and more healthcare needs. But you'll notice here that we concern ourselves most with money leading up to retirement. But once we get there, we realize, oh, healthcare and cognitive function are way more important to me now, and making sure that I keep those things and maintain those things as much as I can as the longer that I live. And so it's interesting. We don't think about this enough prior to retirement, and then it kind of smacks us in the face. And this is what does it, right? When you're younger, you might have a doctor's appointment every once in a while. You have some telehealth nowadays. But then as time goes on, you need more and more assistance. The numbers are actually pretty wild. 68% of adults over 65 take 5 prescriptions or more. That's average. So just keeping those straight becomes sort of a chore. And obviously, as health declines, or your partner's health or someone that you're caring for's health starts to decline, the administration of that gets harder and harder and takes up more and more of your time. Being a caregiver is really, really difficult. And this is when I get a lot of, oh, best laid plans, right? I thought that my wife would take care of me, or my husband would take care of me, or, my sister was going to take care of me, or my son, or my whatever. So often I see that the expected caregiver, was never told the plan. So what we're just highlighting in this navigating longevity phase is it truly does take a village as you start to get older in giving care to yourself or others around you. And you really do need to make sure communication is super clear with everyone that you're hoping will help. And if it's not, or you're talking about it prior to a crisis, then it's a chance for you to make a plan that gives you a safety net. And really, the idea here is to understand all the things that might happen and make sure that you've got some resources to help you or your family with those responsibilities. And they're out there. And that's the beauty. There's something that's called an aging life care manager, aginglifecare.org. But basically, these folks they're not free. They're usually about $2,000 for their services. But what they do is they coordinate care for someone who really needs a lot of it. And I know a colleague that had to hire one, and the family, prior to hiring this aging life care manager, had spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to help mom who had dementia, get her in the right place, get her with the right caretaking. And none of it had really worked. And they had spent about $2,000 on this aging life manager, and she set them up with everything that they needed. And it was the appropriate care for what mom needed. So it was well worth the dollars spent. But just know that there are people out there that can help you think about these things. And then last but not least, this will not end on a sad note, but the last phase of the journey usually is a solo journey. And this is when, you are either left living alone, a spouse, a partner, friends have passed away, and it is just you. And often what we see here is that folks will start to revisit the first 3 phases because they're doing it by themselves now. And, a lot of times this is the female, but not always. It's interesting, though, to know we always think of, people like 80s and 90s being in the solo journey, but the average age of widowhood is 59. So, it may come earlier for you. It may not even be a death. Maybe it's a divorce too. Gray divorce has doubled since 1990s. That's divorce rate over the age of 50. So just interesting to think about these things, even if it's not your current situation. But going back to those three questions, who's going to change my light bulb? Well, right now it's my spouse. But if it's just me, what's the answer to that? How am I going to get my ice cream cone? Well, my spouse drives me, or, my son can drive me. Well, what about if they're not around? Those are the types of questions that we're encouraging you all to ask and just have some thoughts about. And like I said, a lot of times we'll revisit the first three phases during the solo journey. But I will end on this and a couple of other thoughts. Social activity can really protect against age-related decline. So I go back to that last of the three questions. Who are you going to have lunch with? We can't really stress enough how important it is to maintain your social network, especially as you get older. It's not as easy as you get older because our chances of running into people consistently go down, right? We're not working maybe at a job every day. We don't have kids that are school age where we see other parents of the same aged kids. We're not at school. All of the things that make us make friends kind of go away as we get older. And we need to maintain that social network because it is such an important part of living well into late into your life. This Rush study was really interesting. They surveyed people and asked how often they participated in different activities. So 1 was once or less a year, and then 5 was almost every day. And a 1-point move on that scale corresponded to a 5-year difference in motor function, in physical motor function. So I tell the story of my grandmother here. She lived till 97, and she was not healthy. She was like Jeannie Calment, the lady at the beginning. She smoked cigarettes until she got sick of going outside in the cold. She was from Cleveland, Ohio. So she got sick of that, started vaping instead. She drank like a fish. She really did not take care of herself physically, but she lived to the ripe old age of 97. And she actually happened to die during the shutdown from COVID. She didn't die of COVID, but her life prior to that shutdown, prior to March of 2020, she had plans every day. And she had friends of all ages, friends younger than me, friends her own age, friends my mother's age. She always had something going on. And she worked at that kind of intuitively. That was just what she was liked doing. And so when COVID hit, she died a year and a half later, not surprisingly, when you look back at it, because her world became tiny. All of her social activity went right out the window. So the woman that was, acting and behaving like she was maybe 75, 80, but she was really 95, all of a sudden was closer to 100 because she didn't have any of that social activity. So can't stress enough how important it is to think about that last question, who are you going to have lunch with? And invest in your social portfolio as much as you do your investment portfolio. So I do like to end on this because we do peak at certain things. And we peak at certain things as we get older that are pretty darn good. So we peak at running a marathon at age 28. You'll see that on the screen. So that's past for me. That's okay. I'll take it. But peak in life satisfaction at age 69. And it says again there, we peak for the first time at 23. We're finally out of the house doing our own thing. But we peak again at age 69. We have happiness with our bodies peaking at age 74. And psychological well-being, we peak with psychological well-being at 82. So a lot of good things to look forward to, a lot of life to lead after you, quote unquote, retire or shift out of your full-time career, maybe into something different. So how do you prepare for this? I just have thrown a lot at you. And we've got that left side covered, right? How much will retirement cost? That's what you work with Casey and Abby and the team to talk about. And that's certainly important. Now, though, we need to start thinking about what will you do in retirement. A robot can't help you, right? It's awesome that you're being presented this from your financial advisors because they're going to be able to help you talk through the 8,000 days think about the four phases and help prepare you for retirement, a human connection that can think about your fears, your expectations, your excitement about something. And at the end of the day, the four phases are meant, again, to enable you to create somewhat of a vision, to plan and participate and anticipate what is likely to come. There's Dr. Joe again. He said, preparation can reduce uncertainty and boost prolonged independence and control in our lives. And therefore, hopefully helping us to fill in the gap between that longevity, that longer life, and what we do to fill it and fill it well. We do have a worksheet that I can send to everybody for distribution. It's just going through those four phases, and it asks you some of the questions that we asked you just now, and it allows you to maybe write down some thoughts. And it definitely would do it with a partner or family members or anyone that you're sharing your life with. But it's, again, important to just start having these conversations, thinking about it, and making sure as you get really excited for finally leaving that job, or if you've already left that job and now you're staring at 22 years potentially or longer, how you fill it and you get excited instead of anxious, nervous, or depressed. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for any questions. A lot of times we don't see a ton of questions here because brains are
Yeah, it's all spinning.
But I wanted to open it up and see if anyone had any questions or comments. I mean, one thing I love to hear is how someone is successfully maybe executing some of these things if they're already retired, or if you've thought about it. I'll give you all something to think about while maybe questions are coming in. I read a great book and I recommend it for everyone. It's called Your Retirement Quest. And it's available on Amazon. It changes price anywhere from like $13 to $17. I'm not driving. I am in my car, but I'm not driving. Someone just wrote a car. And the book is called Your Retirement Quest by Alan Spector. Alan and his partner were HR executives at P&G in Cincinnati. And they retired so many people and recognized that a lot of the men, mostly that they were retiring, were coming back to ask for jobs, ask to eat in the cafeteria, asking for anything to do because they didn't have anything going on in their lives and they had lost all purpose. So they put this book together. It's a 10-step process to find out what your retirement quest is and essentially be able to then have some good thoughts going into retirement by the time you get there. But just a thought, Your Retirement Quest, really good book. I even did it and I realized I better get some hobbies, make some friends that aren't work. But any other questions?
I haven't seen any come in. I don't know if you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask away. Otherwise, Jen, thank you very much. Very informative and just a good, like you said, thought-provoking presentation on how we're going to spend this last phase of our life, which again is hopefully at least a quarter of your lifetime when we get there. So we thank you for joining us. And
yeah, thank you all for joining. And Abby, thanks for putting this on. I think this is such an important topic, and just the fact that you are offering this to your clients tells me that you're ready to help them with some of these plans. So I think
we
that's
try,
really,
like I said, most of our conversations are obviously money, but you got to think
yeah,
past that. It's not all about the money, right? It's about having a good life and living a good, I think I read a piece on your website, maybe today, about mattering. Like people want to matter when they're in retirement. They want to feel like they're useful in some way. Otherwise they, get depressed and things like that. So along those same lines, it's just things we need to all think about, right? So we have a plan.
Yeah, have a
Yep.
plan. Best laid plans, I get it, but having a plan is better than just going in blind. So
It is.
good
And
luck.
even when you have a plan, sometimes it's still challenging, as I can speak to, unfortunately. But
Yeah,
it
curveballs are thrown, but it's,
yes, right.
you know, keep the communication open with your families, with your advisors, and have fun with it too. This is a totally uninvented phase, so we can do that.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, again, thanks very much, Jen. We appreciate it. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. We will follow up with that white paper, and we'll send that out to everyone so you have it. And then if you have any questions about financially in retirement or anything you want to talk through about the phases, we're happy to do so as well. All right. Well, take care. Enjoy your fall. Christmas will be here before we know it. And we'll be on the lookout for our next seminar. Usually in the winter, we do the Medicare and Social Security seminars. So be on the lookout for those. We will get those on the books and be doing those shortly. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jen.